feeling that this is gonna be my day. Let's go to the brave space.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of The Brave Space. I'm your host, Laila Monterrey, and today I would like to explore the topic, what is trauma and how does it affect your life? Just a little bit of information about the science on trauma. It has taken quite a long time that emotional and wounds of your psychic have been accepted by our society. It was only in the late 80s. So there were a lot of people that suffered from what we today call post-traumatic stress syndrome. But because of the misunderstanding, it has been named under other words. When happens trauma? Trauma happens when something happens to you that your system, your brain, your neurosystem is not able to cope with. It's overwhelmed with fear, anxiety, shock, a lot of emotions, and you cannot just cope with it. It's all the things that should not happen to you, like physical violence, emotional violence, or sexual violence, abuse. But there's also a big amount of trauma that happens in our childhood by not getting what we should have needed. As a baby, you come to this world and you're highly dependent on your parents, on your mother, and the love of your parents, that they provide you with food, provide you with everything you physically need, but also to provide for your emotional needs. What are needs that, beside the physical needs of food and shelter and a home, that have to be met for a person to grow healthy? It is unconditional love. It means unconditional love is to be loved for who you are. It is to express your emotions freely without judging. It is to be seen and heard. It is that you get a sense of, I am important, I am loved and wanted. And if some of these things or all of these things do not happen, then a lot of childhood trauma can happen to you. What is the effect of trauma? There is a short-term effect and a long-term effect. So trauma is what happens inside of you when you experience a traumatic event. If someone hits you, something inside of you is happening. Trauma is not that someone slapped you, but it is the reaction inside of you, what was going on in your brain and your nervous system that led to probably a trauma response or an adaptation that is, in the short term, it's a healthy way of your body and soul to cope with trauma. But in the long term, it will cause you a lot of problems in your life. When you experience a trauma, your brain is, you go from your prefrontal cortex that is able to make decisions on a logical base. You go to the limbic system, which has very limited ways to respond to situations. And the trauma responses that we know are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. If you have a trauma that you haven't worked on and released, this trauma can show up later on in your life when you get triggered by something that is similar to what has happened to you, but would not be considered as traumatic. But you get triggered and the part in your brain is being activated and you start to react in a way as if this trauma is happening again to you. So your whole being is drawn back into the past and you start living from a past. I would also say the biggest loss of trauma, what really happens, is if you experience a lot of pain and if you experience a lot of feelings of guilt and shame. That especially happens when you have been victim of violence. you develop a lot of shame and guilt inside of yourself. It is very likely that it happens that you start to disconnect from yourself. You start to develop a very, very bad sense for yourself. And this is I think, the biggest loss. Because if you disconnect from your true self, from your feelings, from your needs, you will go through life in a very painful way. What does it mean to disconnect? To disconnect from yourself. When you experience shock, is a very healthy reaction is to go numb and to stop feeling. It's your body is protecting yourself from experience so massive pain that you wouldn't be able to cope with. But if you keep this disconnection, you're neither able to name your feelings, and you're also not able to name your needs. And this might lead to a lot of false decisions in your life. Also, trauma can have a severe effect on the development of your brain. There is a lot of research that shows that addictions have a lot to do with trauma. The impulse control is something that is related to trauma in childhood. Because for example, when you experience a lot of stress in your childhood, your brain as a child is so overloaded that the parts that are in control of your impulses cannot develop properly. And it's the same with ADHD. So you experience childhood trauma and your brain is not able to develop healthy. Also, mental illnesses later on in life, like depression, has a lot to do with suppressed anger from childhood wounds. I made a list of things how trauma can show up in your life. The first question or the first sign of trauma is, do you have a healthy sense with yourself? Do you love yourself? Do you accept yourself and your body? How do you feel about yourself? Do you experience a lot of shame and guilt? Does everything has to be perfect in order to feel good about yourself? Do you have a sense of inferiority? Do you compare yourself to others? Do you get triggered and have, and I mean not have anger outbursts or start crying, which is not in proportion to what happened? So this is always a sign of that there is something inside of you, big hidden wound, that when you just tinily push on this button, it starts to explode. Yes, do you have to deal with addictions? Are you repeatedly in unhealthy relationships? Do you have codependency issues? This means, like, codependency issue means, for example, if you always feel responsible for the feelings of the other person. Like, say my partner is angry and I feel guilty that he's angry. It's my responsibility. I feel it's my responsibility to soothe him. Or do I go into a way of living my life that I have to help a lot of people to be in service, to feel good about myself? Are you taking good care of yourself? Not good self-care is a huge, huge sign of trauma. Do you recognize, can you feel your emotions and your needs? And do you act accordingly to them? Are you burdened with a sense of hopelessness? Are you sad? Do you experience feelings of sadness in an unproportional, unhealthy way? Is it difficult for you to enjoy things, to feel happiness, freedom in life? Or what is also a sign of trauma is this toxic positivity. Are you overtly optimistic? Everything is okay when it's not. So it's also a denial mechanism. So as I said before, trauma has a huge impact on yourself, on your personality, on the way you are going through life. Are you consumed to be an attractive person? Is it important for you to get a lot of attention because you didn't get it as a child? Do you have a very negative body images? So these are questions that you can ask yourself to find out if you had trauma in your life. Another sign of trauma or effect of trauma is also that you are very inflexible in the way you live your life or respond to outside circumstances. I think this is called emotional elasticity. So you go to a defense mechanism. You go into fight, flight, freeze because, again, you go from your developed part of the brain into the survival part of your brain where you have only limited ways of reaction, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. You're not able anymore to sit down calmly and act from a place of connecting with yourself and finding a solution, a healthy solution for things. As I said, a lot of trauma happens in the childhood and has a lot to do how you were attached to your parents and how they met your needs. For a baby, it is the highest need to be attached to someone because a baby needs someone to help him survive, to provide with food, to provide with shelter, and also with positive emotions. And what happens if a baby or a child doesn't get this in a healthy way? The child would go to an adaptation. This means it would abandon himself and go to an unhealthy way of living. For example, when you have a parent that always puts the blame on the child. And the only way to get love from your parent is to take on all the guilt and the shame. So you will adapt to this and you will start to please your parents. You will start to shush yourself down, suppress anger, and you will also press these healthy emotions to an unhealthy parent. And you will adapt yourself. And later on, this will show up in your relationships, in your private relationships, but also in your work relationships. So attachment style is something that is so important to have a look. How have you been attached to your parents? If you had to make compromises to feel loved, but also maybe a compromise to freeze yourself, to disconnect from your true feelings because it was so hurtful for you, this would have tremendous effect on how you walk later to life. Because if you disconnect from yourself, if you abandon yourself, you're not gonna get in this life what you deeply desire. Oh, yes. Another point, trauma is something that gets deeply stuck in our system, in our brain, in our nervous system, and in our body. And I can say that myself had, let's count the years. It was back in 2009, and now we have 2025. So it's 16 years that I had a severe trauma, and I still can feel it in my body. I've worked a lot on it, but it can stay in your body for years and decades. Yes, and in your nervous system, it could happen that you have feelings of anxiety, panic attacks, general anxiety disorder, post-traumatic stress syndrome, mental illnesses. The traumatic imprints can have so many effects on your mental, emotional, and physical well-being. I hope this episode was useful for you. The very next episode that is coming up is, I love it, is an episode with my dear friend, Dr. Srikumar Rao. And we are going to talk about resilience, how to bend back from traumatic experiences and come out even stronger. I love this episode. There's so much to take away. So I would love if you show up again, and goodbye from the brave space.